You often don't hear about motorcycle journalists talking about reliable motorcycles or motorcycles that are durable. That's because most motorcycle journalists only get bikes for a few days, so they can't really test the bikes very well. But for a consumer or somebody that wants to keep a motorcycle for a really long time, it's very important to know exactly how durable and reliable motorcycles are. Anyone can get a motorcycle and ride it just for a few times during the weekend, here and there, and it's going to be reliable. But if you expect to ride a lot, you need to find motorcycles that are reliable. This is my list of the most unreliable motorcycle. Number 4, Harley Davidson. I actually thought this would be higher up on the unreliable scale, but it only is in 4th place. At one time, Harley was even worse than they are now. Now they're struggling with sales, and millennials definitely don't like riding Harleys these days. And the dentists that ride Harleys right now are kind of dying off. And most young people are not attracted to the style of Harley Davidson. Back in the 1960s, when the only competition in the US were Harley Davidson and Triumph, basically Harley Davidson by comparison was relatively reliable. But with competition comes better choices for consumers, and as soon as Japanese bikes started to flood the market, everybody realized that Harley Davidson were just subpar motorcycles. Harley Davidson is the McBike of motorcycles. They're everywhere in the United States, and everybody thinks that in order to be patriotic, you have to own a Harley. But that's a very old mentality, and most people don't feel the same way because most people in the US like to believe in capitalism, and capitalism is about choosing the best product for your money. Harley Davidsons cost a lot of money to buy and to keep running. They're also very inefficient, they have very large motors, they're very slow, and every single aftermarket part for it also costs a lot of money. And then you get the Harley dealerships that are complete rapists, and they will steal all your money because that's what Harley Davidson dealers do. They make a lot of money on just the clothes, not just the bikes. Lately, Harley has been going up in reliability, and that's mostly due to looking at the Japanese engineering and trying to clone it a little bit, but still keeping the Harley feel. Harley recently even launched the edition of the Livewire, which is a 100% electric bike. But unfortunately, due to Harley Davidson's reliability, they had to stop production of this bike because it would not charge. And when you have an electric bike, it's very important to be able to charge. Next up, third on the list is Triumph. And I've owned quite a few Triumphs, and I am a fan of the styling of Triumph, and I love their 3-cylinder engine. So I was a little confused when I saw the Consumer Reports data to reflect that Triumph is one of the more unreliable makers. But now that I think about it, when I first got my first Triumph, it was pretty unreliable. It needed a top-end rebuild after a very short amount of time. And one of the things I noticed is that Triumph were a little bit cheaper to buy than a Harley, for example, but still required a lot of money to maintain because the dealers, they would say that Triumph is still an exotic brand, and they would add costs associated with that. So you would get the same cost of fixing a Triumph that you would with a Aprilia or Ducati. Triumphs back in the 60s were known to basically leak a lot of oil. Now the modern Triumphs don't leak oil, but they do have issues associated with reliability. They are still made by a bunch of British guys with bad teeth, so sometimes engineering is not their forte. On my 2000 Triumph Speed Triple, I put 75,000 miles on it, and I never really had major issues, but I did have issues. And issues that I would not have had on my V-Strom or any Honda that I've ever had. The issues crept up. They were minor, like little electrical gremlins here and there, and I did have issues with the engine sometimes losing power and it required a whole lot more maintenance than a Japanese bike. If you don't put a lot of miles on a Triumph, it's fine. But of course, if you want a bike that's durable, that's you're able to keep for a very long time, a Triumph is not really that sort of bike. I can see the Triumphs being held in people's garages, so they kind of go up in value a little bit. But the thing is with Triumphs is that their resale value is extremely bad. If you want a decent Triumph, you can get them in the used marketplace for very cheap. Number 2 on the list is Ducati. Ducatis are some of the bikes that I've always wanted to get, but I've never gotten. And because what kept me away from buying a Ducati, first is the price. But second is the amount of maintenance that these bikes require. And every time like you say this, Ducati owners go like, no, it's not that maintenance heavy, but it is. It's all in comparison to other bikes. Ducatis are beautiful machines. They look great. Every single thing that they seem to design looks beautiful. But the problem is, if these bikes are working, they're great. You know, they handle great, they have great suspension, they're beautiful to look at. But when things break, and they will break, they cost so much more money to fix than a equivalent bike from Japan. You could get a Ducati Monster relatively cheap. Usually the super sports are going to be costing you quite a bit more. But the price of the motorcycle is not what you should be concerned about. The cost is really associated with ownership. Now, for a guy like me, I like to do all my maintenance. I never take it to a bike shop. But if you're not like me, you're going to be taking it to a bike shop to get it fixed and maintained. And Ducati dealers are very expensive. And if you're like me and you want to work on the bike, you're going to have to get tools that only work for that specific bike. This is something that a lot of European makers have you do. They just make you buy tools just for that bike, and I hate that because if I'm going to be my own mechanic, I don't want to get new tools. I want the tools that I have from bike to bike to work on all my bikes. Also, Ducati makes the service intervals extremely short. For example, I'll give you an example, a Yamaha FJR 1300. The service intervals are like 27,000 miles apart for valves. On a Ducati, it's close to like 6,000, and that's pushing it. And of course, if you need a part from Italy for your Ducati, you're going to be waiting a very long time because a lot of times Italians don't like to rush. They'll take their time, they'll drink their wine, and then they'll send you the part. Maybe.
So there it is, you can hear it. So I do have a motor right here.
Number 1 on my list for being the most unreliable bike and most overrated bike is, of course, BMW. I've owned quite a few BMWs, and I have to say that the bloom was off the rose within a few thousand miles. I realized that this bike is maintenance heavy. I've had friends that had 100,000 miles on their bikes, and as I'm curious about what happened. Did anything happen to your bikes? And they usually say, no, not much, just routine maintenance. And then I research it into their bikes and on ADV Rider, for example, and I noticed that their shaft drive failed, they had the top end rebuilt. These are things that a lot of BMW riders don't tell you because they kind of gloss it over. BMW is a particular brand that's very loyal to the bike, and they're completely okay glossing over some of these little details. But even Consumer Reports rated this as one of the most unreliable bike manufacturers in their data. You had a 40% chance of a bike made by BMW crapping itself within 2 years of ownership. These bikes are such dog shit that the frames break. These are bikes that are supposed to be good for riding around the world. But you can't really, because their frames break, their shaft drives have major problems, they're constantly burning oil. That's one thing I noticed about BMW. Like I had this GS and it was consuming oil. And really earlier on, I was like, there's hardly any miles on this bike. Why is it burning oil? And then I went online and people told me, oh, that's perfectly normal. And I keep thinking to myself, why is that perfectly normal for a BMW? You wouldn't say that about a car. If my Toyota Corolla was burning oil, I would imagine that the engine is messed up. While my second choice of most unreliable, Ducati, is a beautiful bike, BMW is a terrible looking bike. They are not well designed bikes. Aesthetically, they're very ugly bikes to look at. So you would think that they would somehow compensate by having better engineering, but they don't. What BMW does is that they over-engineer things and make things way more complex than they have to be. Somehow, BMW has gotten the reputation of being this very reliable bike. And the reason they got this reputation was that back in the day when Triumph Harley was around and BMW was kind of like the shiny dog turd in that group. And so everybody thought that's the most reliable bike. So they're going by reputation. The one thing I do admire about BMW is their marketing machine. It's a very fine, well-oiled machine, and apparently that's the only thing that's well-oiled in a BMW. So that's my list of the most unreliable manufacturers for motorcycles. And I think for me, Japanese bikes have made me a lazy rider because I don't have to like really maintain Japanese bikes. And when you compare it to any of these makers that I just mentioned, a Japanese bike is so easy to work on, and oftentimes you don't have to work on it very much. My V-Strom 650, nothing ever breaks, nothing ever needs anything. You know, the only thing that you need to change are like the sprockets. But imagine if you get a Honda ST 1300 with a shaft drive, you just ride it. You just change the oil, you change the filters, do all of that, and just ride it. When I had my BMW, I had to constantly like be working on it. It needed things. It's a very temperamental bike that's not really meant for riders that ride a lot. That's why you see a lot of these BMWs and Ducatis and Harleys in garages, because they are essentially garage queens that are not meant for riders. Now, all of these bikes are personal choices, but if I had to pick a bike, I would rather pick a bike that's not going to leave me stranded in the middle of the desert without any cell signal and that I would have to walk 50 miles to the nearest town. That's probably the bike I would pick. And I think if you were to pick a bike from the big Japanese manufacturers. They're extremely good. They very rarely have any major problems. And you can ride those things for a very long time, and it costs much less to keep running than any other bike on this list. Well, thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.